All right. Hello. This is Tuesday, March 6th, 2018, and this is the weekly meeting for Kubernetes Sig Docs. I'm your host, Zachary Corlison. And that's about all that gets you. All right, let's start with new contributors. Do we have any first time or second time or just new folks with us today? I do not see anyone. I wish you all a good morning anyway. Or a good afternoon, as a daily situational greetings as appropriate. All right, let's get rolling with, I wanted to follow up with some of the updates from last week's conversation. Let's see, is Ben Hall with us? I do not see Ben Hall. Okay, so we'll defer talking about tutorial content until Ben Hall shows up today, if he does. All right, so let's move on for now to talking about migrating Kubernetes.io, migrating the website from Jekyll to Hugo. So I don't see Jared yet either. So Joe, if at any point you want to chime in, and Jennifer, if you want to chime in about anything from our discussion this past week, please feel free. But basically, we met with a dude named Björn Erik Pedersen, who at this point has contributed 80% of Hugo's codebase to it. He answered a lot of our technical questions. We did kind of a deep dive with him about some of the specific concerns and interests we had with Hugo. And while I don't think that we're 100% on all of those questions, I think we are satisfied enough to be able to confidently move forward and say that yes, migrating to Jekyll is something that we want to do. There are compelling reasons for it that are in our interests as a SIG, that are in the service of making contributors' lives easier, and will make it easier, I think, to make developers happier. So yes to Kubernetes migration, or yes to migration to Hugo. And what follows from here is that we need to continue setting the scope of what actually needs to happen in a migration, making sure that we scope out the process properly and completely as we can before we actually begin. Based on our preliminary estimates, and this is nothing more than just kind of gabbing at each other and going, what do you think? Well, what do you think? We're guessing that the actual migration process will take between 3 and 5 weeks. The contractor, we're going to contract with Björn Pedersen to do the work. He estimates that it's going to take him 3 weeks. I remain somewhat skeptical that enough of our sort of situational use cases could be done in only 3 weeks. So my guess is 4, and it's always possible that some edge case arises and it could take 5. So relatively speaking, it's a relatively rapid migration. Our goal is that there shouldn't really be any disruptions to the contribution pipeline. There are going to be some moments where we have to say, hey, stop merging long enough for us to do some cutover pieces, but we'll have more specifics about that as we get them. So I guess the takeaway from it is that yes, we are going to migrate the Kubernetes website from Jekyll to Hugo. We estimate it will take between 3 and 5 weeks. We don't have a specific time yet for when that will begin. We do need to peg it around to be sensitive to the Kubernetes release cycle in whatever time that we pick for migration. And further details are forthcoming. Now, is Jennifer, Andrew, Joe, did I get everything? Is there anything that we need to add?
I think you covered most of it. I did, in the thread that we had going, I had responded with here's some suggested checklists for that migration. I haven't heard anything back on that process, and I haven't done anything to make that more public. That be a worthy thing to do at this point? Is it now stable enough that we think, yeah, we're going to head this direction, that we should do that?
I would say let's get more consensus on that checklist before we start airing that out. I think we definitely want to make that public, but I would like to make sure that we all have consensus about when and how to move forward before we do.
Okay. I'm just waiting for feedback then.
Okay.
I didn't provide any feedback in the thread. I thought it looked like an awesome checklist on first glance, Joe, and I have had no available cycles to look any further, but I will try to do so in the next, well,
Yeah.
kind of depends on what happens this week with 1.10 docs PRs.
It's all good, Jennifer.
Just some background for some of the folks that weren't involved with the change in the decision. I mean, from the little that I know, Hugo and Jekyll are both seem to have a lot of capabilities. What was the motivation to move from one to the other, if that was easy to net out and not derail the conversation?
Sure. So the two driving concerns, well, the two biggest selling points are that Hugo builds much more quickly with large sites. I guess Jekyll, when you get over about 100, 150 pages, Jekyll starts to slow down significantly, where Hugo is kind of renowned for having near instantaneous builds.
Wow.
So the increased or the much speedier build time for Hugo was one of the big selling points. The other big selling point is built-in internationalization. It means less of a Rube Goldberg device with our website if we keep it in Jekyll, trying to fit internationalization into it going forward.
Those are fantastic reasons. Those are excellent. That's so cool. We just have to learn Hugo as opposed to Jekyll.
Well, so the nice thing is that functionally, there shouldn't be that much of a difference in the actual contributor experience. We're still working in Markdown. I think we might be moving to Black Friday Markdown as opposed to Cramdown, which we're using right now. I couldn't actually tell you what the meaningful distinctions between Cramdown and Black Friday are. We'll be moving away from liquid conditionals and sort of away from a Ruby stack in general. So we're moving away from liquid conditionals and towards short codes and more towards Golang templates. So there will be some differences in how we structure documents, but from what I understand, that process, that conversion, should be fairly straightforward, and not a whole lot of in-depth knowledge for contributors is required. Although that may be an oversimplification, depending on what it actually looks like. But my guess is that based on the conversations that we've had, it should be a pretty straightforward adoption process.
Okay. If there are minor changes, some of us can write blog articles and say, hey, here are the little gotchas to look out for. I'm happy to write.
Awesome. Thank you, Brad.
A follow-on is the internationalization is one of those areas that I didn't feel it was definitely a selling point, but I didn't know that we had a particularly concrete mechanical plan of how we were going to enable that yet. And when I asked for more detail from Bjorn, he got he was a little short with the response there. But he sent me towards the Go Hugo site where I've asked the question, and I did get some interesting responses there in terms of strategies and patterns to use. So whenever we get this a little more solidified, I can include the links for those conversational threads.
I did see the thread that you started. So yes, thank you, and we can follow up with that. All right. Anything more about... Go ahead, Jennifer.
Well, the other thing that we haven't really talked about much explicitly with a move to Hugo is the fact that it's written in Go. And I know that for myself, I've been having to work with Go templates for some of Heptio's projects. Not a lot, but a little. And I was one of the ones who said, well, hey, wait a minute, let's stop and back up and look at additional requirements when the proposal was first made. But I do think that for any of us who work on things related to the larger Kubernetes ecosystem, using a static site generator that's written in Go does make for a less bumpy transition between environments.
Sure. Oh, definitely.
Nice.
I mean, this seems obvious, but nobody's really come out and said it quite explicitly, I think, except maybe a little bit in the meeting that we had with Bjorn. So I thought I would just put it out there. It felt a little like, not exactly the elephant in the living room, maybe the sleek, cuddly, kitten-like tiger. The thing everybody likes, but that feels like they don't need to say.
Sure. No, and I mean, that's a fair point, is that anything that makes our interface with the rest of the Kubernetes contribution ecosystem easier and less specific to docs is a good thing in terms of ecosystem friendliness. So
yeah, I mean, other people have mentioned that to me, but I just thought of it as more of like the cherry on top of the cake, and or whatever mixed metaphor I want to use. But yeah, like it's definitely a plus.
Andrew was sold at the faster build, I think. Faster build.
Yes. Faster build was like, that's all me, I'm in.
done. Yeah, I think we're all there. Okay, so moving on, let's talk about rotations for the PR queue. I missed the dawn of the PR queue, but Andrew, I would like to say from my heart to yours, I love you. So I'm really glad that we have a queue for PR Wranglers. This is amazing. So Joe, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about what you learned as a PR Wrangler in your first week.
Okie dokie. Let's see. A huge number of people that contribute fixes to our docs are little one-off typos. At least 80% would be my rough estimate of most of the contributions are in that form. That's offset a little bit more recently by the 110 contributions, which are kind of coming in fast and furious. A lot of people, when they're interacting with the PRs, they're trying to set milestones and can't. Also, they try to do LGTMs and can't because they're not a Kubernetes org member or things along those lines. So a lot of the standard boilerplate messaging sort of fails for them, which means somebody else is coming along behind and kind of sweeping and cleaning up afterwards. Brad's run into that same thing where he has manual merge capabilities but not approved at this point. So while he's doing it this week, I'm sure there was some complications there that made things a little bit more quirky. Beyond that, it was fairly straightforward. The feedback process was obvious. It was not inconsiderate. It was not terribly effective in terms of time management. It took probably about an hour to 2 hours a day to do the sequence that I did. So there's probably something I could have done to make that a little bit more efficient. But that was the gist of it. I tried to go through all of the PR queue, the whole set, every day for a week.
Nice. And thank you for writing up your observations in that gist. It's been, hopefully, Brad, I think you've already mentioned that it's been helpful to you.
Oh, yeah. Well, the write-up's been huge. I love the write-up. It gives me some good, clear, consistent instructions on how to handle certain situations. So actually, I have it, Joe, and I have the key parts highlighted just right here. So it's a beautiful cheat sheet. Like I said,
Nice.
The things I ran into, because I've now been running it kind of since Sunday. The thing I see is sometimes I'll look and I'm going through and then there's somebody already assigned. So now I think of myself, okay, did the person just haphazardly assign it, or the person got assigned and I should just ignore that one and just, put my name and worry about the ones where somebody didn't already assign. And if the person assigned is not one of the folks on this call, I get a little nervous, right? The people that are typically on this call. So that was the one question I had is, was that just somebody, they were suggested to assign this person, so they did it, but maybe that person isn't as engaged as the rest of this group here, and I should still come behind it and put my name on it as well. That was kind of my one question to worry about.
That's exactly what I did. I just added to the assignments. A lot of them some of them were very intentional, but a lot of them were just clearly responding to the comments in the PR that the Prow automation put in, hey, go assign somebody, we suggest this person.
Right. Okay, so I'll look out for that, and I can do like you did and put my name next to them as well to keep moving them forward. it's been not too hard, I think, to find technical reviewers, right? I saw one come in that was core DNS, and I think, the only issue I had, I think I had the chat dealing with that. But now that I can just say, hey, try to do an LGTM, and then I think we just had one come in on sort of high availability etcd. Looks like a really minor change. I'm trying to look at that, and I'm like, I kind of know this, and I think it's fine, the little change, but in the back of me, I kind of have this nagging feeling that, no, let me go get a etcd to do the quick tech review, even though I'm like 99% sure it was a very simple change to not use a duplicate name for the multiple etcd servers. So sometimes I kind of struggle with that, where I feel like, oh, I know this well enough, I can just say it's fine, and then part of me is like, oh, get a tech reviewer. Did anybody ever else have that trouble?
Yes.
Okay. So,
yes. And reading Joe's doc. I mean, I haven't been in the queue rotation, but just reviewing PRs in the past, I've definitely gotten stuck. And reading Joe's just really helped me think about reviewing going forward and getting unstuck. Sort of when in doubt, I'll slap a tech reviewer on there, and Joe's got good guidelines about sort of going and finding somebody. At the moment, I'm focused on 1 to 10 PRs, and those tech reviewers are pretty much available because they're all listed in the issues that the Docs PRs are related to, right? So review is kind of built in there, and because I'm tracking I'm tracking those PRs based on the features, it's pretty easy to do that where I'm not sure. But in general, I think that Joe had really good advice, and going forward, I will not let myself get hung up on a PR because I think I ought to be able to tech review it, but I'm just not sure, because that's silly. That just holds things up.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I mean, for me, I'm not saying that does for you, Brad. But
no, I'm the same way. I'm the same way.
Well, that's excellent news. So just looking at the queue rotation, Jennifer, I saw that you signed up during the meeting for to be the PR wrangler for March 26th through the 1st of April. We need somebody to be the PR wrangler from the 19th through the 25th. And
I couldn't. We have a Heptio on site that week, so I was not available.
If someone else would like to do it, that's awesome. Otherwise, I'm happy to step up. So anybody who's like, me, I want to be the PR wrangler.
It's really fun. You meet interesting people.
Me too.
I actually have to travel to a conference that week, so I don't think that's a good week for me.
Oh, good. Well, it's going to me in 3. Mine.
And where's the PR wrangling sign-up list? Just curiously, I missed that. I'm sorry.
It is in the meeting agenda, and it will likely keep a spot in the meeting agenda from henceforth because it's really awesome to have it there.
Fantastic.
Okay. Let's move on, and let's talk about a docs proposal. So this week, or last week, Dan Kahn, the CEO of the CNCF, dropped a line to me and said, hey, can you update the, in the setup section, the top article of setup on Kubernetes.io is an article called Picking the Right Solution, and it is, holy cow, out of date. Can you update that? And he asked specifically for updates to highlight certified Kubernetes solutions. And I said, sure, I can do that. And I started looking at that whole setup site, and I realized that it's symptomatic of what I see as a larger problem in our documentation set, which is when we are hosting provider-specific instructions and documentation. Oftentimes that information goes stale, and there is not anyone. There's no clear chain of ownership. It's not clear who owns provider-specific documentation or who's in charge of maintaining it and keeping it fresh. So consequently, we end up fielding PRs for other OS, other platforms that are not, that we have like some instructions on our website, but my thought the thought I have is whether it would be better to point to community's own instructions, like hosted, for what's a really good example for CoreOS, pointing to CoreOS's material, rather than attempting to host dual source on our site, rather than maintaining provider-specific documentation on our site in general.
The Typhoon documentation is actually really, really good too.
Yeah, and as this is Chris. I'm the one of the SIG OpenStack leads, and this was a discussion we had last week at one of our big events. As we're moving, to a more OpenStack upstream external provider. That was, coming to the Sprint Friday. One of my goals was to actually get the OpenStack documentation updated, but instead that goal shifted to helping, kind of everybody, develop a path for everyone to externalize their documents. That would be great because we realize that, we identify a ton of gaps, and it's hard to keep on top of it. And right now we're spending more time removing bad docs just so people don't have a bad experience, as we sort out how, things are changing in our ecosystem. So, as a SIG leader, external provider SIG leader, I totally would be on board with this.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Chris. That's helpful to hear. And likewise, was that Stephen? Stephen Augustus, who chimed in?
Oh, anybody else?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Steve, go ahead.
So this question has come up several times over the last year and a half, and we've gone back and forth on it. At first, we were thinking, we can't possibly maintain this material. Let's just have other people host the material on their own sites, and we'll link to it. And then, over the last year or so, we've kind of drifted more towards thinking there's value in having the one-stop shop, so that we will host it on our site, but we won't be responsible for its accuracy or maintenance. So that's just kind of how the thing has drifted over the last year or so. And I'm perfectly open to the idea of removing it from our site and just having this hosted on other sites. I think if we do keep it, we probably want to make sure each one of those topics in the front matter has a reviewer listed, not an owner, but not an approver, but a reviewer listed, so that we always know who to go to if somebody submits a PR with small changes, or if we're starting to get the sense that it's out of date.
So I was recently thinking of something around like the getting started guides. It would be really cool if the documents that we had some sort of mechanism to signify staleness. So maybe every 6 months or so, a doc that was specified for a set of reviewers could be tagged, like this doc might be stale, and that would trigger like someone from that SIG, if it was an external cloud provider or something, going in and maybe updating the doc.
Is that, do you think that is a more worthwhile solution than simply like refusing or declining to host the content and pointing instead to the community's own content where it's hosted by that, by whatever product or community that is?
I mean, definitely in some instances, it's more worthwhile to have that external community hosted documentation. But I feel like our getting started guides should have some way for people who want to have some sort of agnostic Kubernetes solution be able to actually get started.
So I would the only counter that I would put to that is kubeadm, and the idea that kubeadm is the preferred configuration tool, and that with kubeadm things just work, and that like keeping a whole bunch of platform specific or OS specific getting started guides may be one of the exact solutions we're trying to figure out and fix by preferring external hosting. I mean, in light of kubeadm, Stephen, do you think does that change your mind at all?
Yeah, sort of, I guess. But it's different strokes for different folks. So someone mentioned the CoreOS documentation, and now that documentation auto redirects to the Tectonic documentation, which not everyone wants to touch. So like one of my tasks at some point is going to be forklifting all of the CoreOS specific documentation into the site if that's still wanted. But yeah, I mean, like not everyone's going to want to go with KubeADM. It is a good starting point, but maybe not the right solution for everyone.
Sure, and I think there's a larger conversation there to be had about what makes sense to host rather than, well, we are hosting these things now, so let's find a way to shoehorn and make the things that we do have work. I think it's time we start thinking about the larger question of what is the best thing to do with this material and other material like it in general. What's like, not just what do we do with what we have, but what can we do to maximize developer happiness or user happiness?
I think, I mean, it might be worth bringing up at the cloud provider working group meeting too, because you're going to have representatives from from a lot of the interest, like especially for the public clouds, they're going to have representation and they're going to have opinions and they're going to be involved with a lot of the SIGs. Like, it's hard to know how SIG AWS or SIG GCE or some of these would feel about it. It feels like if you're not going to externalize it, having ownership and responsibility within the Kubernetes community makes a lot of sense. Because I know that an experience that we had was documentation was brought in, from a third party company, and they just stopped maintaining it, and then we kind of had to come in and clean it up, and but having a single location, I mean, in my mind, having a single location, even if it redirects, where you say these are the docs that we know have some level of standard for maintenance and installation, I think is important, and I think it's valuable to the user community.
I think that's fair. Yeah, I'm just thinking about when that third-party documentation goes stale or goes out of date, and that information is hosted on Kubernetes.io, whose docs suck. It ends up being Kubernetes as well. Kubernetes docs suck. So that's the kind of the problem that we need to solve for here. And it seems to me like linking, pointing out rather than, and not even, like I was thinking yesterday, like is mirroring a good idea? It's really not. So I mean,
So I'm thinking maybe we get a tracking issue open for what to do with the docs, what to do with the getting started docs. We maybe start in SIG Cloud Provider. Like, I forgot who mentioned that, but I mean, that'd be a good start to see like what are the best docs to use for each provider, right? Consider linking those. And I know there's supposed to be like a chart of supported providers and what's the level of support. I'm not sure if that's been updated in a while. So maybe this could be like a dual effort there.
So Chris, when is the SIG Cloud Provider meeting? Because I would like to attend and have that discussion.
That's a good question. I've only been attending the Slack channel myself, so it's something that I want to get onto my schedule.
Okay.
Working out new leadership responsibilities for SIG OpenStack.
Sure. I will track that down, and I will reach out and get in contact with you, Chris, and Stephen too, if you're interested.
A little bit of a counterpoint just to flesh out some of the conversation. I've seen PRs recently that do both add more to the docs in line and move things out, including one for VMware cloud provider pieces is shifting out. It looks like in the process they dumped half the data. So there's some weirdness happening there. And then there's also been an issue opened fairly recently that really caught my attention. And Zach, I think you actually replied to it, where someone was very frustrated about the jumping around that is necessary because of the way that we linked out in some of our other documentation. So it's something we might want to keep at least an eye on and try to make the flow as smooth as possible so that they don't have to hit 6 pages to get one thing done.
Agreed.
And just one extra comment, Zach. If you're going to have the content over here on the Kubernetes side, we have to face the fact that if that content is bad, it's going to reflect poorly on Kubernetes. That's the perception of the user. So if there is enough value to have that content in-house per se, we're going to have to think about some mechanism or process that says, here's how we're able to make sure this content is good enough. And if content goes in bit rots, that there is a way to aggressively say, listen, you've not kept this up to date. And if you don't get it up to date in a week or so, we will pull it out of tree. And that was what we used to do in the old world that Chris and I were in when we had third-party providers for drivers, that either you met those minimum standards and you weren't making us look bad, or we threatened to pull you out and then you weren't even there. So we should think about that, if we're going to keep it in tree, that we become a little bit forceful, and people do pay attention to that. When they were threatening to pull our drivers out of the IBM products out of the tree in OpenStack, I gave the guy my cell phone and just said, you have any trouble, you call me and I'll put a full-time developer on fixing it, because we didn't want to get pulled out of that tree. So that's the stick you have to help people keep this all up to date, if that's the way we want to go.
Sure. So that sounds. When I put this on the agenda, I was thinking more about the conversation at the high level. Is this something that we want to get specific about? Which of these two, which of the paths open to us do we want to go down? And it sounds like. So I guess by show of hands, if you are in favor of linking to, rather than hosting other provider platform OS docs on Kubernetes, on the Kubernetes website, if you are in favor of instead pointing to external sources for that documentation, raise your hand.
I'm raising my hand.
I can go either way.
Okay.
I'm ambivalent.
Yeah, I'm undecided yet. I got to see how bad it is when they're bit rotting versus how wonderful it is to have them just right there. I'd have to kind of do more investigation myself before I could make an informed opinion.
Yeah, I'm on the same page as Brad. I'd like to know kind of what are the more common things that cause the docs to become stale or out of date. And then also, I don't know, just thinking like pie in the sky, like, is there a way to do some sort of single sourcing mechanism where, yeah, they can like write it and host it, but then we can, pull it in, similar to, maybe not similar, but like conceptually the same as like how we're thinking about pulling in docs from other Kubernetes repos. Like, so, we're like a single source for people to like view these docs, but not necessarily like be the canonical, source where they're kept up to date, So I'm just.
And to that, Andrew, I would say when so say that an operating system provides some sort of documentation. They host it. They have a repo. They host it in a gist, and we import that gist into Kubernetes docs. When that documentation goes stale, whose docs suck?
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, so that issue still applies, but like, I mean, we can put a disclaimer that says like this is sourced from that location. I mean, and then I think also there would need to be some sort of notification mechanism. So if a user has a problem with the docs, like, and they can hit like, hey, I have an issue, and it goes to the owner of the doc, not to us.
Sure. But when I hear
I'm just thinking out loud right now. I mean,
sure.
Just trying to think about other solutions so that we have a good user experience, but then also like can still satisfy these requirements.
Sure, and I mean that's I share that same end desire. I think we all do, of wanting to make our users happy and making sure that they have access to the information that they need in a way that's going to make the most sense for them. But I also look at the infrastructure required to import and maintain and indicate freshness for external content, and that's another tooling piece that we would own. And I think about, well, what is the return? What is the return value on that, as opposed to just pointing to an external link? And it's not as immediately clear to me that having external tooling simply to have that information visible on Kubernetes IO is a markedly superior return on being able to point offsite.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with something like that. That that it's if you make a commitment to have a provider or an installation method, I think that you're making a commitment to keeping the documentation up to date on that. And to me, it seems like hosting it on the Kubernetes website is something of an endorsement of that, and it hides the ownership and the responsibility for that ownership. I mean, the more I think about it, we have a community that an OpenStack that's trying to have more ownership over the provider and the experience that Kubernetes has on OpenStack, and and we came to the conclusion that it's difficult to keep that quality up when you're hosting it inside of a different community, and you don't necessarily have the membership there or the understanding of the culture, and it becomes more difficult. So making people responsible for their own work means that you can point at it and say that I think pointing at it is actually just a better solution overall. But that's just my point of view on this.
Thank you. That's helpful. This has been a really good discussion. I feel like all of the points that folks are raising are really salient and are really important to consider. So yeah, thank you. So what I'm hearing in terms of next steps is get an idea of the impact of what we're talking about, because right now there's a feeling of a big impact, but not necessarily a quantifiable amount of documentation that externalizing would actually affect. So I will take an action item to assess the externalizing impact. Like how many specific pages are we talking about when we talk about these things? And externalizing documentation, and then we can come back to that next week.
Zach, do you mind if I add one more quick thing?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, one, and then I'll add another one either in the Slack channel or next week. Folks have talked about not wanting to fragment the user experience by pointing them off the Kubernetes website. But if someone is using OpenStack and running Kubernetes on OpenStack, they're already in the OpenStack docs. They're going to need to navigate between the two. I think that it's important if we're looking at, I mean, there are various getting started solutions, right? But insofar as any of them represents another ecosystem that the user is dealing with, we might want to consider that as an issue too. It's not just a matter of navigating away from the Kubernetes docs site in order to get getting started information, then you navigate back. And I know that there are other unfortunate UXs, in pieces, but that's just my high level comment about it.
Cool. Thank you. No, I agree. It's I think it's a reasonable thing to expect that users who are working with different operating systems will have multiple doc sets up at the same time. And I think the way it may be, we may make users happier. I mean, well, we definitely make them unhappy if they're looking at different doc sets and going, one of these is wrong, one of these is out of date. So it's minimizing any opportunities for frustration and minimizing dual source. I think is a really valid concern there. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Jennifer. All right, anything more on externalizing before we move on? Okay, Stephen Augustus, sorry to bury the lead, but now would be an excellent time to talk about CoreOS install docs. So in light of our conversation about externalizing documentation, is this something that you want to continue, or do you want to take more time to reflect? The time is yours.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some reflection time, definitely given the CoreOS is now Red Hat situation. So there's a lot of the older docs that the the goal around removing and redirecting docs to Tectonic was the Tectonic docs are something that we actively maintain, and we actively maintain with every release. Sorry, there are trains in the background. That we actively maintain with every release. So those are very easy to modify as features within the platform change. The vanilla how to install Kubernetes on container Linux docs, some of them are pretty well updated and some of them are not. So part of that effort is going to be culling all of the docs that are not updated, deciding whether or not I need to remove them, and kind of making it, this kind of goes back a little to the, sorry, trains everywhere. This kind of goes back a little bit to like, how do we organize docs that may be from external providers, right? So in my mind, there is a delineation between the docs provided from a provider that supplies an operating system. There are docs from cloud providers. They're all-in-one solutions that are either operating system or cloud provider agnostic. So I think a lot of those things need to be mapped out. Maybe we should drop a proposal for it or start an issue for it and get the conversation going around that, whether it's to loop in the SIG leads from cloud providers and get that conversation going. I definitely still want to bring the Core OS docs in. I just think it's a larger conversation.
Okay, so in terms of a concrete next step, what do you suggest?
Well, I'm on the container Linux doc specifically, or on the getting started stuff.
How about on the getting started stuff?
So one thing that I noticed from some of the docs is that it includes a little mapping of the types of distributions that you could use and whether or not they're community maintained or commercial. And maybe we should get a table together of some suggested distros that are CKA approved and go from there. I don't know what everyone's thoughts are on that.
I think that's the goal with the, so for that top level page and setup for picking the right solution is being able to point to certified Kubernetes solutions and listing those. There's a URL where those are already listed. I don't know if it makes sense to add another one specifically to documentation or simply to reference that, the existing link. But that's something that we can talk about.
Yeah, I feel like that should be the top level.
Okay, I agree. Okay. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we move on?
You guys are free to move on.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. Okay. Going to just a reminder to everyone, our first annual SIG Docs Summit is coming up on May 9th in Portland. It's the day after Write the Docs, and it's in the central office in the Pearl District. So hopefully you could just, whatever stay arrangements you're making for Write the Docs, if you were attending that, whatever stay arrangements you're making, just carry them over for an additional night. Central is really easily walkable. If you need to catch a ride, it's very close to the Crystal Ballroom in Portland. Do we have, looks like we've got 7 people who are currently registered. Do we have anyone else who is committing to attend?
I may be able to. I have to see if I'm going to Red Hat Summit first.
Awesome. Well, we would love to have you.
Is it a 1 day or a 2 day?
It is a 1 day. It's not even a full day. We will likely work and discuss from 9 to 3 and then go out and do something fun as a community in the afternoon and evening. Because I know by midday Wednesday, I'm going to be hashed, and I would love to go out and relax and get to know everyone better. All right, so that is that reminder. Brad, do you want to talk about Twitter handles?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. We got so many cool things going on. We had Joe putting up a review document. I was refreshing myself with the style guidelines, which are really, really cool. And so I do a lot on social media. I do a lot of tweeting, and I didn't do a good job of getting everybody's Twitter handle so we can sort of amplify our message. I think one of the things you'll start to see me tweeting out is I'm going to start doing some style guide tips. So, the way the style guide is written, each little section kind of would map to like one single tweet, So, for example, using active voice or what have you. So you might see some of those going out. So before I started doing that, and then I would link to the style guide. So just kind of a great way to get more visibility for the doc work going on. And I just thought, let me make sure I get everybody's Twitter handle. So, I always do hashtag Kubernetes. I didn't know if there are any other hashtags to add, but if I had the right group of folks, whoever's tweeting, we could amplify the message. And then especially as we go from Jekyll to Hugo, we'll probably want to kind of get that word out too. So just trying to use these new modern fancy tools.
Do you have an official Kubernetes Sig Docs Twitter?
We don't have an official Twitter for Sig Docs. There's obviously an official Kubernetes one, but not an official Kube Docs or Sig Docs. Should we have one?
Do we think that would be valuable? That'd be kind of cool.
It would be kind of cool. I have to be honest, I'm not much of a tweeter. Mm-hmm. So, Andrew, do you love Twitter?
I haven't really done much in Twitter. I have an account that just sort of sits there.
So it's not that we're opposed to it. It's just, I have to be really honest, I wouldn't do anything with it unless Brad was like, post this. And I'd be like, okay, I'll post it. It would not be well maintained under my watch.
Mm-hmm. If you want me to take ownership, if we're comfortable with that, I could do that. If we can come up with a thing, it's up to you all. Or I can just do it from mine. I don't care. It's whether y'all think we need it or not.
Let me talk with the CNCF and see what, if any, official policy we have for Twitter accounts for individual SIGs.
Oh, what a great idea. Okay. Like I said, I usually do okay because, I've got an okay following. I got like 1750, so I can, followers. So I can usually get a decent word out if I get some retweets and stuff to the community. So I'll just keep doing what I'm doing, and if we have an official one, I can figure out how to manage that if that makes sense.
Brad, I just followed you. I'm on Twitter a fair amount, mostly professionally with regard to write the docs, and the intersection of these two would be a really cool thing to promote, I think. So okay. I'm there with you. I will. I've been Twitter fitful lately. I'll try to get better on top of it, at least with hashtags.
Okay. Yeah. So I was looking to see if you popped up, but you haven't popped up yet, but I'm sure you will. Okay, cool.
All right, excellent.
I'll call you back.
So is there anything else that folks would like to discuss? Any last minute additions to the agenda?
I had, just since we've got a minute or two, anybody reviewing 1.10 PRs? I think I've got myself assigned to all of them, and it's not hugely critical at this point. I'm looking at both merged and open, so it's not a huge big deal. But one thing that happened this morning is a couple came in without the 1.10 milestone, so I learned more things about querying GitHub. If people could just keep an eye out for 1.10 things as we reach merging PR deadline this Friday, I'd appreciate it. I am trying to stay on top of that multiple times a day at this point. but we've got a few outstanding issues. I put the information all in the agenda, so I'm not going to repeat it all here. But just saying.
Keep an eye out for 1.10 PRs.
Yep.
Excellent. All right. Last call. That's it. That's a SIG meeting. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.